Good afternoon. His Excellency Ambassador Johar Salim, President, Institute of Regional Studies, esteemed speakers, dear participants. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to today's high-level policy dialogue on climate finance and international cooperation for strengthening climate resilience in Pakistan, organized by the Climate Resilience Program at IRS. Today's dialogue brings together policymakers, development partners, and climate finance experts to discuss practical pathways for strengthening climate finance governance, improving access to international resources, and accelerating investments in climate resilience. We are honored to have an eminent panel of distinguished speakers who bring extensive national and international experience in climate governance, climate finance, and sustainable development. To formally welcome our distinguished guests and set the context for today's dialogue, it is my privilege to invite Ambassador Johar Salim, President IRS, to deliver the welcome remarks. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. I believe it's already afternoon, right? Okay. Minister Shehzad Mansab would be joining us shortly. Dear friend Samuel Rizk, Dr. Ali Toki Sheikh, dear Hamza, Amir Saab, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Today's topic, climate finance and international cooperation for strengthening climate resilience in Pakistan. It's of great import, and it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the IRS for this high-level policy dialogue. You know, I often say that I got involved with this international diplomacy on climate change issues since 1992. That is when the Earth Summit took place in Rio, so many years ago. Since then, so much has happened. But also, I would say that there's so much that did not happen. And in many ways, humanity has fallen behind in terms of what should have been accomplished. And one of the biggest reasons for that is that we could not manage the flow of resources. At Institute of Regional Studies, we believe that this happens sometimes when there are some shortcomings in policy, or there are the level of coordination that should have been between rather amongst countries, is not there to the extent that it should have been there. And very often, it is because the national policies are not really well-informed policies. And they are not so because to have a well-informed policy, a policy rooted in evidence, you need informed dialogue. And a lot of times that is missing. So we, on our part, endeavor to be a center for informed dialogue. In an era defined by unprecedented global challenges, no institutions, governments, or organizations can claim to have all the answers. Effective policymaking increasingly depends upon bringing together diverse perspectives, encouraging open exchange, and building partnerships across sectors and national boundaries. So that is why we have convened this forum, not merely to discuss climate finance as a technical subject, but to examine one of the most important strategic questions facing the international community today. How can global cooperation evolve to enable climate resilience in the countries that need it the most? And I believe Pakistan is one of those countries, fifth largest in the world in terms of population, 250 million people. And despite the fact that Pakistan's contribution to global emissions are very low, Pakistan is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world in terms of climate challenges. So for us in Pakistan, and we believe internationally, climate change has become one of the defining issues shaping international affairs. It increasingly influences development priorities, investment decisions, regional cooperation, humanitarian action, economic planning, and foreign policy itself. Consequently, climate diplomacy has emerged as one of the most dynamic dimensions of contemporary international relations, requiring governments, multilateral institutions, financial organizations, and research communities to work together in ways that might have been unimaginable only some years ago. This changing landscape demands equally significant changes in the way we think about international cooperation. The more pressing task today, the more pressing challenge today is whether our institutions, financing mechanisms, and international partnerships are evolving rapidly enough to respond to the risks I mentioned. Around the world, governments are seeking practical answers to very difficult questions. How can international climate finance become more timely, more accessible, and more responsive? How can multilateral development banks enhance this role in supporting resilience? How can vulnerable countries such as Pakistan access climate finance without being constrained by increasingly complex procedures? And how can international cooperation deliver measurable outcomes rather than simply reaffirm shared aspirations? And based on my experience, I represented Pakistan at the UNFCCC in Bonn for 4.5 years. I mean, my impression, being part of so many meetings there, was that climate finance remains a jigsaw puzzle. You know, when I was there were sometimes claims being made that developed countries have already contributed, and this is, I'm saying, 2018, $100 billion as the GCF. But when we would get into the details of that, what we would find out was that most of that money was actually just repurposed money, or money that was already there, that had been given to those countries or being allocated for different development projects earlier on. And now it was just being relabeled as climate finance. That needs to change. Because we all know now, and many experts in climate finance would tell you that, there are the climate conferences at the COPs. There's a talk about hundreds of billions of dollars of climate finance. Sometimes the aspiration is for $1 trillion or more. But the actual resources available is a very minute fraction of that. That needs to change. Otherwise, we are not going to make any worthwhile progress. Ladies and gentlemen, climate finance is ultimately about far more than financial flows only. It is about creating an enabling environment in which countries can pursue resilient development, strengthen institutions, leverage innovation, and expand opportunities. Achieving these objectives would require strategic vision, effective governance, and enduring international partnerships founded on mutual trust and shared interests. Today's dialogue offers a great opportunity to examine these issues from multiple perspectives. And that is how we have gathered such a great and diverse panel here today. I hope our discussions will encourage new partnerships, bring forth new ideas, and contribute to strengthening Pakistan's engagement with the evolving international climate finance architecture. I encourage all participants to engage actively, share experiences candidly, and contribute recommendations that are practical, innovative, and forward-looking. The true success of today's event will not be measured by the speeches we deliver, but by the quality of the dialogue we foster and the partnerships we strengthen. My dear fellow panelists, I wish you all a very productive, insightful, and engaging dialogue. And like you all, ladies and gentlemen, I look forward very much to benefit from the dialogue that we have today, because at the end of the day, protecting this planet and its resources is a shared responsibility of all of us. I thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much, sir, for your insightful remarks. It is now my pleasure to invite Dr. Samuel Rizk, Resident Representative, UNDP, Pakistan, to deliver his presentation on strengthening climate governance and institutional capacity for resilience in Pakistan. Dr. Rizk, may I kindly invite you to the podium?
Thank you very much. Presentation seems to be such a big word from what I am about to do for the next 10 minutes. So let me just share a few thoughts. But it's always a pleasure to be here at IRS. Ambassador Jawhar Salim manages always to find a way to touch on the most critical, sensitive, and timely subjects, and to be able to do this with a kind of frequency that I think makes IRS one of the premier institutions and studies that some of us in international development can come to speak at and learn from. So thank you very much, Ambassador, for the invitation to join. Fellow panelists, and partners and friends, former UNDP, current UNDP, and future UNDP staff. It's a real privilege to be here today. Really happy to go after the ambassador, because I think the global, the regional, and the national perspective on where Pakistan stands on climate vulnerability is absolutely clear. If you're here, you know already the numbers and the facts and figures. Pakistan, super vulnerable to climate change. Everybody remembers 2022 and the big flood, still suffering to date. A lot of the recovery programming from the 2022 flood is actually still ongoing. And then we get to maybe 2 years that were semi-okay, I guess, managed those. 2025, another flood, 2 different areas, 2 or 3 different areas, not the same locations. But just as grave if you've lost a life, or if you've lost a house, or if you've lost a livelihood. Etc. And that's why, maybe that's where I start then with my first point. At what point does climate resilience become broader, or an issue that is not just about finance? And if it is about finance, it's not only about how much, but the quality of finance. Ambassador touched on this a little bit. Access to finance, and what kind of finance and where does it come from? That, I think, is important. But I think the most important lesson that actually came out of the 2025 flood, and we heard this loud and clear, we didn't invent this, it was everybody, our national partners were telling us this. The most important lesson from the 2025 flood was a governance lesson. It was not about we need more money, it was not about we need another donor conference, etc. But most of it was, how did we not prepare enough for this? What have we done more? And we will ask you for help when we're ready for it. And in fact, in many cases, in the majority of cases around the 2025 flood, where national resources were the ones that were primarily used. And that, I think, is important as well. I don't know if this is an echo or if this is another climate finance session ongoing, because there are many of those, by the way. So that, I think, is important to recognize. And it's great recognition, especially on the part of Pakistan, being so vulnerable. 2022, 2025, the majority of the discussion was on floods. 2026 discussion in terms of vulnerability is some mix between drought and flood. Maybe 1 or 2 different parts of the country as well. Now, we're not talking about earthquakes. We're not talking about other shocks, quote unquote, that might displace people that come from other countries or displace people from inside the country. All this to say that looking at Pakistan and its vulnerability and resilience map, I think requires quite a lot of caution and care. And that's why most of the discussion these days is about how do we anticipate and do better. I will get to a point that I don't want to forget, which is about the cost of resilience, because there is a cost to that as well. Over the next week or 2, I hope, when the planning minister returns from the US, alongside the planning ministry, we will actually support them to launch a lessons learned exercise from the 2025 flood, which after any big event like that, the international community would typically come together and undertake what is called a post-disaster needs assessment, similar to 2022, 2023. The UN system with UNDP representing for that, the European Union, ADB, and the EU. We didn't undertake a post-disaster needs assessment for 2025 flood, like I said, because it was much more important to think about what were the lessons that were learned from there. And the immediate support actually took place on the part of the governments, provincial particularly then. But what came out is a set of papers that have now turned into a lessons learned exercises. One of them is on climate finance, others are on rapid assessments, others are on coordination, and I think we will see that soon. On policy, there is a little bit of a contradiction, I think, here in Pakistan, where I think there's a lot of discussion around there's no need for any more policy. There's actually plenty of it. And the issue is implementation. And then we also support, like UNDP and many others here, support policy gaps or the gaps in between different policies that either appear contradictory or overlapping, etc. But I would just say that one of the things that stands out, and maybe we hear this from the minister when she joins, is the coordination gap. So lots of policies, lots of people in charge effectively means no one is in charge. Climate finance, I feel, is one of those areas that is a little bit in a gray zone. Is climate finance a finance problem or is it a climate problem? Does it need scientists and policymakers and decision makers on what needs to be done? Or does it need the finance people who say, well, I understand clearly the urgency, so here's the financing for it. And that, I think, remains an unresolved question as far as I'm concerned. And I've been here for 3 years now, and I think we're going in the right direction, but it is one of those difficult issues as well. If policy is an issue and in relation to international cooperation, then I'm really pleased that us and almost everybody else in this room has been able to support the Ministry of Climate Change and the government to finalize and develop last September the Nationally Determined Contributions 3.0. That is what Pakistan decides or is allotted to in terms of its contributions on climate change and environment, on adaptation and mitigation for the next 10 years. Great news so far. We actually met the timeline. Implementation thus far on NDC 3.0, not very much. And this is where I encourage other partners as well to figure out how to support the ministry's ambition towards all of these things on electrical grids, on energy, on electric cars, on emissions over the next 10 years. So again, almost everything I tell you today is about pros and cons. We went one step ahead and we're still waiting for the next step as well. On the nationally determined contributions, the policy is there, and I think the implementation is what needs to come forward. On finance, I fully agree with what the ambassador said. I do think that Pakistan has a legitimate grievance on climate finance globally. And I think it doesn't really start in the last 2 or 3 years after the COP meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh and the Loss and Damage Fund, because Pakistan was so instrumental in getting it set up. But it actually comes before that. Even before coming here, when I worked for UNDP's Crisis Bureau in New York on issues of climate and security, one of the studies that we put together was the per person amount of money of climate finance, how it comes to, and what is the country, what is the typology of the country that actually gets there. Yeah, I pause a minute for the minister. Warm welcome to State Minister, a dear partner of ours and a partner of everyone here as well. So I was saying that the grievance about Pakistan's access to development finance, particularly climate finance, is a grievance that goes back some time. It's not just the last 2 or 3 years with the loss and damage fund. It's not the adaptation fund. It's not about how little comes from GCF or GEF to this country despite the need, but it goes back several years. And I share just one study from, I think, 2021, which is the per capita amount of climate finance that comes to countries. Wealthy countries, North and West, about the study, our study basically said that this was around $128 per person in some of these countries. Once you get down the line to either fragile or conflict-affected states or poor states, the number goes down to about $2. So that is, I think, the level of difference between why the ambassador has been saying COPs have these mega global commitments of billions and billions of dollars, and we struggle here to get 40 or 50 million dollars worth of GCF funding, which is something that I think continues to be an issue and requires quite a lot of advocacy, especially on the part of the government, and all of the development partners support that as well. Quality of finance, I think, is really quite important to consider moving ahead. The reliance on grant money is important because grant money does help bring in additional resources, can be used for innovation, cutting gaps, etc. But moving ahead and in the future, I think it is important that there is a discussion about the balance between grant money, soft or concessional loans, and other loans, many of which, as the ambassador said, are repurposed loans. And we saw that clearly in the 2022-2023 flood response as well. It is important to have concessional finance. It is important to have standby agreements. And from all of the discussions that we know since the 2025 flood, the standby facility for resilience from the IMF was actually used. So it was actually useful. The issue is, this is still a loan that needs to be repaid, concessional as it might be. Maybe for me to conclude, 2 or 3 things that I think are important as well, and I'm sure we'll hear about this from the panel too. And I think this kind of comes up because we have just, or the government has just concluded the budget discussion. The budget discussion, as most people are aware, I think concluded peacefully politically. But if you look at development finance and climate finance, a real big discount, to say the least. And I think there is an important discussion to be had, which is if there were the ability to spend more in this country on social and development programming, climate change included, environment included, how are some of the choices being made? Because it turns out that just one single climate calamity will take away people's lives and livelihoods and potentially has the ability to wipe off $30 billion off of the current GDP. So budgeting, public investment, public finance, the role of the private sector, etc., is really important. That's why we've been working alongside a number of partners on insurance, risk, and finance, including working closely with the Ministry of Climate Change, including on the Global Shield as well. Secondly, institutional capacity and project preparation. I once asked, almost naively in a meeting in Economic Affairs Division with development partners, what is the shelf life of a bankable project? We developed bankable projects almost regularly, but if a bankable project is sitting on the shelf for 2 years, it's no longer the case. It's no longer aligned with national development priorities. It can be a road or a house or some kind of green infrastructure, etc. But if it sits on for too long, the government may have already found financing for that. And that became the case, indeed, when we were collaborating with MOCC to send a number of bankable projects to the Finance for Development 4 conference in Spain last year. A number of the projects that had been developed for even over 6 months or a year were already ideas of the past, not ideas of the future. So the capacity to do it, to write up these projects and have feasibility assessments for it is one thing. the ability to shop them around and make them attractive to investors, private sector or other bilateral partners or multilateral banks, I think is another thing as well. And then measuring the resilience or the resilience measurement in people's lives. We often talk about institutional resilience. Are national and provincial disaster management authorities connected enough? Are they able to withstand and manage and monitor and coordinate the next crisis? I think there's a good argument to be made that all of these bodies have actually moved ahead in their institutional capacity. But if you talk to them individually, they'll say, we need more support. And I think that's important too. And the bottom line is people's resilience and community resilience, institutional resilience is what makes this happen. Maybe I close just briefly with the cost of resilience. Despite all of the discussion around, how much prices have gone down either for green transition and energy and solar, etc., the price of resilience remains high. If you want to build a resilient house now, related maybe to the 2022 flood or rather in Balochistan, and you want it to be seismic proof, you want it to be flood proof, you want it to be not too hot for the people that will live in there, you want it to be a single room house, maybe with a bathroom, that might actually cost you $6,000, maybe $5,500. There are other models in the country where you can build a house for people for 1,000 or 2 houses or 2,000, but the resilient part in the face of the next inevitable shock, I think becomes a question. And this is where I come back to the finance part. More money, yes, I think that's important. More domestic money and smarter investments, yes, I think that is important. But I think figuring out what the balance is or what it takes to actually be resilient for individuals just in the housing part will be important, let alone what is a resilient livelihood, what is a resilient social or basic service or social service will look like. On UNDP and the UN's part, all this to say that much of the discussion now in relation to what does the UN and the international system do in the context of disaster, most of our focus now is on helping the countries exit very, very quickly out of humanitarian relief. In 1 month, 2 months, 3 months of people getting food packages and tents and non-food items, great. And I think the spirit here in Pakistan is already that. As soon as you can get people back on their feet, give them money to go back to work, to restart their livelihoods, to fix the school or hospital, I think that's really quite important. That there are a number of policies that are changing now in the UN system to go in that direction. So, Ambassador, thank you once again. I'm looking forward to the remaining discussion with the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rizk, for your valuable insights into strengthening institutions and governance systems that are essential for climate resilience. It is now my honor to invite Mr. Ali Touqeer Sheikh, one of Pakistan's leading climate change experts and board member of the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. He will speak on climate finance governance, its challenges, and reform priorities for Pakistan. Over to you, sir.
Assalamu alaikum. Dr. Shazra, my friend Sam, Ambassador Saab, distinguished panelists, distinguished friends and ladies and gentlemen. The topic given to me is in front of you, and I just wanted to pick a key word. And the word I picked was reforms, with your permission, sir. And I did not want to talk much about reforming global system, about which we just heard, or for that matter, loss and damage fund. I'm just returning yesterday from the loss and damage board meeting. Just leave the global arena and let me see if I can draw your attention to domestic reforms. It's a topic all of us are very interested in. It's very difficult to grapple with, But having a coherent thinking can hopefully, given the number of younger people in this room, will help you influence your thinking. My core argument was only one, and I want to focus only on one argument. And that is Pakistan's problem is not short of money or the absence of instruments. There's plenty of money and there are plenty of instruments available to Pakistan. It's a shortage of one accountable authority that is responsible to deal with climate finance. And that I'll try to show. This is problem number one. I've listed it and I'll show you, give you its proofs. And then I'll give you second proof that this gap, that there is no central authority, central or coordinated authority to deal with it, costs us internationally. We are not able to access financing that we needed. And finally, I'll give you a response, what can be done. And I'll try to do it all in 10 minutes or so. Next. Now, proof one that I want to share with you is there are 4 institutions, all with veto power, none of them having a clear signing authority. Finance Division, Economic Affairs, Planning, and Climate Change. Climate change is responsible only for the policy and to UNFCCC related finance or UN system related funds, and that too not negotiating. Its own ability to access international finance is next to zero because it's not an accredited agency. It has to go to accredited agencies if it wishes to support Pakistan's access to finance. Planning Division, headed by Planning Commission, does not have climate proofing of development projects in Pakistan. It's not its mandate, and therefore your PC 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, none of them prioritizes climate proofing that could help you access international finance. And then finance has a veto. It has mandatory occurrence the moment you talk about international finance, be it an MDB or any other window. In order to fix this problem after the Paris Agreement, Pakistan set up 3 institutions that are listed here on my slide. And we are very fortunate one of those institutions is represented here. None of those 3 institutions fall within the rules of business of Pakistan under Schedule 1, 2, or 3. And therefore, whatever they generate need not go to account number 1. That's 1. Number 2, not at all to NFC awards. So if it is about climate change, climate disaster, resilience that Sam talked about, it sits outside NFC awards. And if climate or environmental issues are provincial, this money will never go there. And we'll hear more about it from my friend representing NDMRF, who is representing one of those. Climate Change Authority took 10 years to operationalize. It has not been operationalized. I understand last week the Climate Fund was notified. Now that will be another fund at the cost of 18th Amendment, because if it's a provincial subject, why we need another fund at the national level, federal level? That issue is not resolved because very explicitly when the act was passed, Climate Change Act was passed, it was an explicit effort by the government to undermine 18th Amendment. So it was a counterweight to that. Next slide. These 3 are not the only 3 institutions. In last few years, we have created many more. At the federal level, there are at least 3 climate finance wings in different ministries, and at least 4 provinces have started their own. And none of them talks to each other, and there is no forum that coordinates them, and they don't report to anyone. There's a totally disjointed infrastructure or ecosystem that has emerged. Each one of them, these 6 bodies, are independent of each other. And in fact, they are somewhat secretive also from each other. Next. I want to give you one more proof that the internal system is disjointed. I don't know how many of us were born before 1971. There was a cyclone called Bhola. Several 100,000 people died. Pakistan introduced a relief fund that continued at least 2 years after the separation of Freed Pakistan and emergence as Bangladesh. Not just that. General Zia started ICRA Fund, not a dime went into education. And it was quietly assimilated into national budget, both funds, Bola and ICRA. And then first Prime Minister Sharif, in my research, introduced flood relief. And since then, at least 6 or 8 times flood relief funds have been launched. All of them have been quietly absorbed into the national budget. Every time it was announced, separate accounts will be kept, it will be audited, and it will be disclosed. No audit is in public domain that one could see. I stand corrected if there is any. Now, every relief and climate fund created since 2005 has carried a public commitment to an independent audit, but never happened. That erodes our credibility internationally. And you remember I mentioned there's a cost, international cost for domestic absence of transparency. As if this was not enough, we are collecting this budget, and we have been collecting for the last 20 years at least, petroleum development, PDLs, petroleum development levies. Now it is in the name of climate change, there's a carbon levy also. It is a very significant amount of 1.5 trillion rupees that's collected from the taxpayers like you and me. But it is collected in the name of provinces, in the name of climate change, but it's not spent on climate change. It's spent on as part of national budget. In fact, if it's climate change, the whole point that it is called a levy and not a tax is because if it's a tax, it will need to go to the provinces as well, 58% share that we have agreed under the constitution. And then provinces will have access to it under NFC awards. And right now, it comes to the federal government. I want to move quickly. Next slide. And therefore, what do I conclude from these 2 or 3 points that I shared with you? That these funds that are collected as relief funds, or these taxes that are, or levies that are collected in last 50 years, I gave you example of 1970, none of them has been ring-fenced. They're quietly absorbed in national budget. And I'm not commenting how the budget is spent, but if you are an international investor or a development partner, you will desire more transparency, more accountability, and a good trail for where did the money go. So it's not that the money is not there, it's that the donor or international development partners or investment institutions' confidence is not there. Because they don't know if it goes in a black box, they don't know if it will be spent on the purpose. Now I take you to the next level. Again, as part of our effort. In last 3-4 years, we have developed a very impressive ecosystem of climate change related tools. Green taxonomy by State Bank. Unfortunately, I can give you a summary. Globally, in China, India, South Africa, UK, everywhere, either it's red or green. A project is supported because it's green, or not supported if it's yellow. In Pakistan's case, we use amber or yellow light also, which means in a country where the governance is not very strong, it's quite possible that every product is labeled as yellow and is approved. So the prospects of it guiding us or guiding our budget tagging, in my mind, is a very questionable thing. Then IMF's resilience, whatever that is called, resilience fund, IMF's resilience fund has conditionalities that between commas has been mellowed and it is not impactful, and we have already consumed first part and now we are negotiating the next one. It is not a development partner's responsibility to undertake reform. It has to come from our sincerity. Their job is to sell money, and that is what they do. And if we are interested in reform and if it coincides with reform agenda, we have not used RSF judiciously in that sense. And I've watched that and worked with them quite closely and to know that. I'm not mentioning other things such as SCCP has guidelines. Guidelines are always guidelines. They are not mandatory. They are not binding for anyone. And Planning Commission's handbook on climate risk screening, approved 2 or 3 years ago, has not been implemented. I just reviewed their 57 projects, and none of them. It was notified, it's government of law, they are violative of the government law. None of them none of 57 projects has applied their own toolkit screening. And therefore, the result is, for international investor, it becomes very questionable that even if they have policies, but it may not mean much. Next. I have 2 or 3 more minutes and I'll finish it, inshallah. Tools I mentioned, several exist, and they are being piloted in the country at a minuscule level. They are pioneering projects, some of them are listed here, such as blended finance, de-risking, leveraging, and contingent. These are not new terms. We may have read about them now in the climate change context in the last 5-10 years. But the important thing is, they are technically important things. It will depend on us whether or not we want to avail them and exercise them. For example, if I say, let's say, leveraging. If I take PSDP's $5 billion or $10 billion, 5 or 600 billion rupees budget that we have for this year, we can leverage that against international finance if we are interested. But most interesting is contingent and parametric facilities. Now, one I wanted to mention is a deferred drawdown option, DDO, favorite of World Bank, and CDF, contingent disaster financing, that my friend Goraya will be hosting at NEMRF. Maybe he can reflect on those. Now, these are like credit card plastics. The money has been awarded to you. You can use it quickly, promptly, without having to spend time waiting for it. So like all other lending, loans from MDBs and others, even these instruments mentioned here add to our overall debt. And last 2 points that I want to make, which are very important these days. Next slide, please. One is that Pakistan just launched a few weeks ago, Panda bond with China. This is not an what is that called? SCIF accomplishment, even though we have a full shop, very influential shop. It is a result of ADB and AIBE's credit facility that they extended to the 95% for us to access domestic Chinese fund. But this fund, I just want to give you one final word on this. Like the earlier bond that WABDA secured for several $billion, have one problem. This is for sustainable development. It does not add to your payback facility. WABDA's fund has the same problem, even though market was not supportive for us at the time, but it's not that you can generate revenue out of successful implementation of funds. So these funds, like Pena Bond, now we are planning to expand it to $1 billion plus, but it will eventually add to it will be absorbed in our budget, and different instruments exist, but it will add to our liabilities than productivity. Finally, in order to conclude, next, I mentioned 3 points. The first point I mentioned in order to conclude my point that I wanted to raise is that give mandate of climate finance to one agency, one institution. This will require amendment in rules of business, which is not very difficult thing to do. And Schedule 2 will need to be, and instead of having 4 people on the table with a veto power, we need to have possibly 1 with a decision-making power. Second, ring fence all the finances that you collect. Unless you ring fence, you'll be abusing taxpayers and you'll be eroding your international credibility to attract international finance. Ring fencing would mean that it will be spent for the purpose, on the purpose, and on the timelines it's collected for. And last slide. Just to conclude, allow me to repeat myself, ma'am. The problem is not shortage of money or the instruments. There are loads of money available, even concessional loans are available. The shortage is an accountable authority who we could hold accountable. That, okay, here's the money X that came, how was it spent, when was it spent? The instruments exist, I shared some with you. They're being tested in several projects in the country and globally, and very successfully in many cases. And they are helping leverage additional finances to the tune of 5 to 10 times each dollar that you put as your equity can give you $5, $7, $8 in equity. And unless Schedule 2 of rules of business is revised, we cannot move forward. So the reform, important reform, is not changing the global flow of finance or making those funds more efficient. All that needs to be done, but that's very rhetorical. That shifts our attention for something that possibly we can do at home. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your valuable perspectives on strengthening climate finance, governance, and reform priorities. Our next distinguished speaker is Mr. Hamza Haroon, Regional Director for West and South Asia at the Climate Vulnerable Forum V20. He will deliver a presentation on Pakistan's climate vulnerability and the imperative for reforming global climate finance. Mr. Hamza, may I invite you to address the audience?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Madam Minister, Ambassador Johar, President of IRS, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. It is always an immense pleasure to be here at IRS, especially being with Ambassador Johar and partnering with him over the last year or so has been something that I'm really proud of, and we continue doing things together. I also want to say that Ambassador Johar has, in my opinion, been on the right side of history during his time as President of IRS. And I want to congratulate him and his team for organizing a stellar event a few weeks back on Indus Water Treaty. I believe it was a conference not just talked about in Pakistan, but the world over. And I was so happy to see IRS at the forefront of it. The slide you see up front is how I'm going to start my discussion. The fate of the vulnerable will be the fate of the world. let it sit down with you for a minute. The fate of our countries is going to be the fate of the world. What we're seeing now may be seen in other countries in a few years, but yet the process is taking its time. If you go to the next slide, please. I'll just quickly go over what we do at V20. I'll talk about the compact. I'll take you to a 40,000-foot level and then bring you back to Pakistan and what we can do with all the instruments and compacts available. On to the next slide, please. Next slide. V20, ladies and gentlemen, is an intergovernmental agency of 74 vulnerable nations. When we come together as the Global South. In the past, we've had presidencies of Bangladesh, Ghana, and recently it's being held by Prime Minister Mia Mottley. On to the next slide, please. Just to give you a sense, there are 4 critical pillars at V20 that we look after. One is the Leaders Forum, which is the UNGAs of the world. There's the V20 Finance Ministers Group, where we bring in together all the finance ministers because it's imperative that the finance ministries be a part of this process alongside with the climate ministries. Then we have a central banks group because the balance of payment crisis also impacts our countries. How do we deal with that? And then there's a global parliamentary group in which we bring in together the parliaments of the world, of the 74 countries of the Global South, to make the right laws that impact our people, our livelihood. Next slide, please. But here's the 30,000 feet level. If you look at the graph on the left-hand side, ladies and gentlemen, the cost of borrowing is extremely high. If you look at the graph, you'll see the average cost of capital, and you'll see the cost of capital, the amount of money you spend to borrow money is above average. So that's the first dilemma we face when we look at the 40,000 level. So if you have to set up a solar power plant in Maldives, it's going to be expensive than to set up the solar power plant in Spain. That's the first thing. The second is the amount of money that flows out of our countries because of these interest payments. Let me give you an example. Almost 1.2% premium higher these countries are paying than the other countries, which leads up to almost $62 billion in excess interest. $62 billion. Now, you'll ask me, Hamza, oh, great, you threw another big number at me. What does that mean? That means in 74 countries, there could have been 31,000 schools. That is what that 62 billion represents. Every year, that 62 billion tells me that there could have been 1,241 hospitals every year in these 74 countries, across these 74 countries. That is just the interest payments that's being spent. The other thing that we realize is, okay, like, we talk a lot about concessional capital, grants and all this stuff happening. What is actually happening? And we found out that in our countries, the total flow of capital is around $90 billion every year. And what is required is $490 billion every year. Who's going to fulfill that gap? That's another problem. Then another problem we see at this 40,000 level is fragmented capital. And what do I mean by fragmented capital? Let me give you a very interesting thing that Ambassador Johar also mentioned. Everyone talks about GCF. We're partners with them. We speak with them as well. But let me give you an example. There are 46 national direct access entities across 30 V20 countries. So 46 entities across 30 V20 countries, which tells us that the direct access of GCF capital is only 25%. So only 25% of our countries actually have direct access of GCF money. So it's fragmented. And oh, by the way, let's not forget, it'll take 9 months or more to get this done. So fragmented capital and long wait times. So that's what we're dealing with. And the last one is fiscal space. You can see on the screen, 4 V20 countries are in huge debt crisis and 17 are in high debt risk. So this is what we see at the 40,000 feet level. This is the game that we're playing. So now we ask ourselves, what do we do now? Where do we go from here? So if you go to the next slide. The first thing we want to do is we want to start working on reforming this international financial architecture, which continuously puts countries like Pakistan in a climate debt trap. So vulnerability to viability compact, if you go to the next slide, is where we're changing the game a bit. We're saying to the DFIs, to Arab Coordination Group, to ADBs of the world, to World Bank Group, we're saying that for too long, the countries have been following the way you want to do financing. Now the countries should be the ones telling you what fits their context, and the finance should then follow suit. So in June this year, we launched the OPEC plus V20 V2E compact. And what we're saying is very simple. We're saying that we need to mobilize capital, we need to have affordable capital, we need to have country-led ownership, and we need to be ready for shock responsiveness when the time comes. And the compact is based on 4 critical pillars: scaling concessionality, longer tenors, low cost. Let me tell you a little bit of a backstory on this. And my apologies to the timekeeper. I just want to make sure this dialogue is open. After the World War II, Britain received loans, and so did Germany. They had bonds. Those bonds and those loans were for 100 years. They paid it off in 2015, 2013. Where are those 100-year loans? Why aren't our countries getting those loans with longer tenor, low cost? That's the question we've raised with them. I've also raised the question with them. A hospital will serve me, will serve my kid, will potentially serve his kid or her kid. Then why am I paying 12-year loans on this when it's going to serve for 100 years? So those are the kind of conversations that we're taking forward with these DFIs. And they're listening. That's the good part. The other one is mobilizing private capital for countries, which includes the climate prosperity plans, which I'm going to speak about a little later as well. We're trying to bring the agendas together. Every MDB you go to has a different priority list. How do you bring those together for our countries? And the third one is promoting country ownership. Why do we still have the fly-in, fly-out model? Why can't you all lead your departments, your country, your provinces, and find solutions? Why does someone from outside have to tell you, how does your street work? That shouldn't be the case. You should be able to do it. And the last is shock responsiveness. How do we have debt clauses? What happens when the next flood hits Pakistan or Bangladesh or Malawi? Will we again have to pay $62 billion worth of interest payments? No, we need to find a common ground. We need to have debt clauses. We need to have debt for climate swaps. Next slide, please. I'm way behind on time. My apologies. So what are we doing? Now we come down the funnel. And what are we doing at the local level? What are we doing in Pakistan? One of the things that we've worked onto the next slide, please, is the climate prosperity plan. What we have figured out is it's not just Pakistan going into all these places and saying, sir, we have been hit by a national disaster. Now you have to help us. 74 other countries are also saying this. So how do you differentiate yourself is the question. How do you create a list of a pipeline of projects, screen project, as Dr. Tauqir mentioned, bankable project, investable projects. That is what we're working on with the climate prosperity plan, but based on evidence, based on where do we want to go with NTC 3.0, where do we want to go with our national plans, where are the priority sectors, and combining all of these together is critical. We've already made plans for several countries, and you'll see the Pakistan Climate Prosperity Plan there as well. Next slide, please. It has been launched in May 2026. And this time what we've done differently is not only do we have a strategy document, and Ambassador, I have to present this to you as well. I actually brought this for you. We also have an investor book. And this is not made for you and I. This book, the National Investor Book for Pakistan, is made for the investors of this country and abroad, who can see a list of 69 projects, which have been screened, by the way, through a proper procedure, which is worth $5 billion, ready to be invested on. So that's what we've done. We've told our country, our governments, and the rest of the world that we are ready to have investors come in and invest in these projects, which are in line with the priorities of the government, which is the right thing to do for the country. So on to the next slide, please. This is just a quick highlight of the sectors and the kind of detail in the projects that's gone in to make you understand what are we trying to do. These are some of the flagship projects that have been outlined. These are some of the sectors. And this has not happened overnight. It took us over 150, 100 plus meetings that we went across Pakistan to every province. And we wanted to make sure it's a whole of society, whole of government approach. And we're not just sitting in Islamabad and creating reports. That was the one thing I was very clear on, that this is not going to happen. Next slide, please. But, you know, the beauty of many of our countries is we love making these reports. You know, next month, someone else is going to come and stand here and they're going to say, oh, look, I made a shinier one. It has a bigger font. The next stage, ladies and gentlemen, is not to collect this in our cabinet, in our offices. We need to start implementation. We need to start delivery. And the conversations we're having with the Ministry of Climate, with the Ministry of Finance, with the Ministry of Planning, EAD, and all those names that Dr. Tauqeer mentioned to you, is to really identify how do we deliver on a national strategy? How do we have the right people who have the capacity, the knowledge to deliver on this? Because if we continuously keep the same people again and again, it's going to deliver the same thing that has been happening in Pakistan. On to the next slide, please. So what we are doing right now is we're trying to form a national delivery unit, which is going to take the prosperity blueprint, which is going to take the investment projects, which is going to have a singular focus on delivery through the federal, through the provinces, trying to get investments in Pakistan to ensure that a vulnerable country like Pakistan moves from vulnerability towards prosperity. In the end, on to the next slide, please. What I just want to say is here are the links that will take you to the Climate Prosperity Plan, which is housed by the Finance Ministry and the Climate Ministry and the Investor Book. I would just like to end on three quick things. Pakistan's climate vulnerability is now a national security threat. It's as simple as that. Let that sink in. Second part, reforming global climate finance is essential because the current system is too costly, it's too fragmented, and it's too slow for our vulnerable countries. And I hope the partners over here and all of you over here, I see some friends of ours as well, continue to work with us as we continue to make some dents in international financial architecture. Let me tell you, it's not easy to do something like the V2V compact. It's 16 different boards you're dealing with when you talk about 16 DFIs. And the aim is to move from this fragmented finance to coordinated investments and to really make climate plans that deliver. So I'll end on that. Once again, thank you so much to IRS and President IRS for taking out the time and for organizing such lovely debates. I hope to take some of your questions later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Hamza, for emphasizing the urgent need for a more equitable and responsive global climate finance architecture. Our next speaker is Mr. Amir Khan Guraya, CEO of NDRMF, to deliver a talk on investing in disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister of State for Climate Change, Ambassador Johar Salim, the President of Institute of Regional Studies, distinguished panelists, and ladies and gentlemen. It's really a privilege for me to be here today and talking to you about the very important subject of financing resilience on ground and investing in DRR. I guess a lot has been said in technical terms and the way forward. But I've been a part of United Nations, UNDP for a long time. I've worked in different countries. What I have experienced is that my first impression is that probably we need to take this discussion to a non-technical level, because I guess that a lot in a country like Pakistan, which is largely an agricultural country still, and a large forces employed within the agri sector and the livestock sector, what I see is that probably climate awareness and awareness about resilience should be something which is naturally there. And also we need to find a way, how do we articulate, like Dr. Ali Tauqeer mentioned about the coordination between the federal, provincial, intra-government coordination, federal level, the provincial level, what I see is that while the forums like us, who are very eloquent, articulate, and we are articulating those demands, some of those also have to organically grow from the institutions of the state, civil society, or the overall population of the country. So probably I will like to think and link better with those institutions. I think there are some thoughts which Dr. Samuel Risk had earlier, said about things. And I like to draw on one thing. First of all, the lens we probably need to use is that resilience is not a cost, it's an investment. I think as long as, that comes automatically to one's mind, there is a price attached to that. At the price tag which was mentioned, it's not a very small price tag. There is something you need to pay when you have to build in resilience, and that payment, that transaction needs to take place. And how do we get into that is another, I think, debate. I would also, a lot of things were post 2022 floods, we were able to build a dialogue, a few dialogue forums. We were able to articulate our demands to the world. Our slogan was that what has happened in Pakistan will not stay in Pakistan. And I think, given the fact that we are one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change in the world, still we do not contribute much to the damage. I guess that right now the narrative is that we are vulnerable, but like one of our distinguished panelists also said, that this vulnerability is not just be us, in the coming days. This will, because given that we are, fifth largest country of the world, this vulnerability will go across the border. So I think that narrative, how much of that narrative internationally is, said and acted upon, I think we need to look at those things. One of the things I'd like to also mention is that our post-2022 floods, we saw the provincial, federal, interministerial coordination going very well. The question we need to ask ourselves is whether we were able to build on that momentum we built, in the Geneva Donors Conference and after that. So I think those are open questions. I think we will have, a chance to, respond to some questions related to that. It is our honor, that at the moment IRS has been very ably, leading a lot of difficult dialogues in the country on a lot of different issues. And I guess that all of us are benefiting from that. I think also that climate change also has fundamentally altered the risk map. And we need to look at things differently because of this awareness. Also, the future of climate resilience lies in the anticipatory action and anticipating the risks, and not just, having a reactive approach, but a proactive solution to the things which we see coming our way. And right now, what my experience is that even this year, we see a lot of more awareness on the climate change alert risk map than it was there 5 years ago. So how do we translate that into action? We would need a new approach to climate finance. It must be not just be viewed as development assistance to the countries or, an aid, but it should be looked at as a strategic investment and not just as, from the countries which are, on these international financing mechanisms, but also across the world, because everybody will be vulnerable to that. Every investment, which we see, which reduces the risk of a future disaster, and it directly contributes to the economic stability. And also, Dr. Ali Touqeer mentioned about looking at the parametric, systems. Now, parametric, in my opinion, is the way forward. That's something everybody would be looking at, but it also has, dividends which are in the long term. If you look at the parametric cycle, probably you need 5 years to actually, look at it as a fruitful instrument. We've recently, NDRMF have led, insurance And insurance is one way of transferring your risk. So we've led the insurance of 150 schools across the Federal Capital, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan against the earthquake. And if you keep building on those instruments, like, coverage for further risks, there will be actually more resources going into those instruments. Our vision is basically at NDRMF is beyond a financial institution. We aspire to become Pakistan's leading platform for climate resilience financing, bringing together government priorities, international climate finance, development partners, financial institutions, and also, the private sector for a common vision on financing resilience. We also aim to bridge the gap between policy and implementation. I wouldn't go into the details of that. A lot has been said, but I think that is one gap we need to be bridging also. Over the coming years, we have 4 or 5 priority areas. The first one is strengthening the project preparation, and it was already said that project preparation, or how long is the window for the bankable project, they are of course not forever. And what we can do is to, make them, I would say, more palatable to the international funding mechanisms, and see how we move in that direction. Also, the second key part of us is promoting risk-informed investments. We have developed a natural catastrophe modeling, which simply said is able to calculate the disaster risk related to 7 or 9 perils, how much vulnerability a certain area has to earthquake shocks or floods or heavy rains. And then on the basis of that, we are able to calculate the parametric insurance cost for that. And that is, something which we intend to use to improve the insurance coverage in Pakistan, the parametric insurance. Also, I believe that there is a certain financial innovation we need to bring in order to better, have a better way forward. We need innovative financial solutions capable of mobilizing larger pools of capital. We are a large country. Our needs are huge. We should be looking at larger pools of capital. This also includes blended finance. I guess that's one of the key instruments. We intend to play NDRMF specifically a catalytic role in bringing all these things together and reaching out to the partners, not just limiting us to the funding partners, but also to the partners who are significant stakeholders in climate finance. Last is also building strong partnerships. I think this is very, very important. Our narrative, how much of it is at the global stage, and how much of this is actually acceptable at the global stage. This is like, someone from the distinguished panelists also mentioned that, yes, we are going and making our pitch for financing, but then there are another, I think, 50 countries doing the same. So why us? That's the question probably we need to ask ourselves and develop our narrative in accordance with that. I think still, we are optimistic. I believe that we have an important opportunity to redefine how climate resilience is financed. We must move from financing individual projects to building a national resilience financing ecosystem, the one that integrates disaster risk reduction, climate adaptation, sustainable infrastructure, nature-based solutions, and financial protection within a coherent investment framework. Now, this will require stronger institutions, better coordinated institutions, and also I would think that, how we say that is that the health of an initiative, the health of a certain, let's say, policy framework or a certain implementation roadmap actually depends on the health of your pipeline. So many times we focus ourselves on implementation. We do not think much about the pipeline. I think the investment in developing a pipeline is extremely important if we were to build a climate financing facility which actually is robust enough to deal with ever-changing climate change landscape in Pakistan. So I think last is why this moment matters a lot for us. I think because globally there is an increased awareness. The question is that not where where the funding is available. The question is that how we position ourselves to access that finance, and that again is the most important question which is facing us today. So in the end, I thank the Institute of Regional Studies, Ambassador Johar Saleem, for holding this important dialogue. And I would very much also think that such dialogues we should try to take to the provincial level, to the local level, and try to be more, hold them at a level where, that knowledge goes across to more and more people in Pakistan. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guraya, for your insightful words and for sharing valuable perspectives on financing climate resilience. It is now my distinct honor to welcome our chief guest, Honorable Dr. Shizra Mansab Ali Khan, who serves as the Minister of State for Climate Change and Environmental Coordination, Government of Pakistan. She has been actively promoting Pakistan's climate agenda at both national and international levels while advancing initiatives related to environmental protection, climate resilience, and sustainable development. Honorable Minister, may I respectfully invite you to address the audience.
Thank you very much, distinguished President of the Institute of Regional Studies, Ambassador Johar Saleem, Dr. Samuel Rizk, UNDP Pakistan, Mr. Ali Tawqir Sheikh, climate change expert, Mr. Hamza Haroon, CVFV 20, Mr. Amir Khan Guraya, RMF, distinguished guests, esteemed experts and students, good afternoon. It is a privilege to be here today to address you on this important policy dialogue organized by the Climate Resilience Program of the Institute of Regional Studies. And I commend IRS for bringing together these policymakers, development, finance institutions, multilateral organizations, and climate experts to deliberate on one of the defining challenges of our time, which is climate finance resilience. And this topic has now taken center stage as far as climate is concerned globally. And we've heard some very perceptive and discerning remarks. Mr. Rizk has told us, given us the global perspective on, we've heard about GCF, GEF. We are always talking about these entities and how the funds are delayed. We don't get enough funds, and we've got a good perspective on that from Mr. Ali Tawqir Sheikh. I was just recently reading your very insightful article also in which you talked about ring fencing, and also a very important point that you made about vertical and horizontal coordination, which is definitely something that Pakistan needs to work upon with the provinces and with the intra-governmental different ministries as well. So I think that's something that we will definitely take away from here. Mr. Hamza has given some very good solutions, which I'm glad to hear, some ways of going forward, which is usually what we're always looking for, some concrete ways to move forward, to get things moving. So I'm glad to hear from you. And Mr. Guraya, of course, always also gave us some good examples of things that NDRMF has done, of actions that have been taken and that obviously need to be taken as well. And this, as all the panelists have pointed out, is a very significant moment, because now around the world, climate change is not taken as an environmental concern only, as was done a few years ago, because people have now experienced it in their own lives. And it is everybody now recognizes and agrees that this is important for economic stability. It's also a moment of recognition that this is a matter of national security and of our food systems, of our water security, of the public health, of energy transition, and of the sustainable development of the country. For Pakistan, as we all know, this is a particularly acute reality, because As all the panelists have pointed out, even though we are one of the lowest global emitters of greenhouse gas, yet we are one of the most vulnerable countries. And the impacts that we have suffered are one of the greatest in the world. The floods, the prolonged heat waves, the glacier melt, the droughts. Pakistan has a very diverse, a very different kind of topography. And because of that, we suffer from almost all the impacts of climate change, from glacier to droughts, to floods, to coastal area problems. So this is the present reality of Pakistan. And these events have also reinforced an important lesson for us, which is that the true cost of climate change cannot be measured only in economic losses. We see around us, and I myself have witnessed in my own constituency, Nankana Sahib, disrupted livelihoods. We've seen displaced communities. We've seen damaged ecosystems. Education has been interrupted, especially girls' education. We've seen strained public finances, and we have seen that the opportunities for future generations are significantly reduced due to these climate effects. So the government of Pakistan has demonstrated its commitment to climate action. Our updated NDC 3.0, our National Adaptation Plan, our ecosystem restoration initiatives, the disaster risk reduction strategies that we have launched, and the renewable energy ambitions reflect that the national direction is clear. However, the challenge today is no longer just a defining policy ambition. It is the delivering and the implementation, as some of the panelists have already pointed out. So this is the point that we all agree upon. It's delivery now, it's implementation now that we are all looking at. And that again brings us back to adequate finance, access to technology, strong institutions, and partnerships, which should be founded on trust, equity, and shared responsibility. So climate finance should not be viewed only as a development assistance. It is an investment in global stability. Again, as pointed out earlier, climate cannot be kept within borders. Whatever happens in Pakistan will have spillover effects all over in the neighbors as well as all over globally. So every dollar invested in climate resilience today reduces future humanitarian crisis and protects regional economic growth, strengthens food and water security, and contributes to international peace and stability. The international community, therefore, has both a moral responsibility and a strategic interest in supporting vulnerable countries and building resilience before disaster occurs. The international climate finance mechanism needs to evolve to meet today's realities. Developing countries continue to face complex access procedures, fragmented financing windows, lengthy approval processes, and limited availability of adaptation finance. And for countries like Pakistan, where climate impacts are accelerating faster than financial flows, access to finance must become simpler, faster, more predictable, and more responsive to our national priorities. The Ministry of Climate Change and Environmental Coordination is committed to strengthening governance frameworks that improve transparency, accountability, coordination, and effectiveness in climate finance. And our objective is clear. We seek to transform climate finance from isolated projects into a coherent national investment strategy that supports resilient infrastructure, sustainable agriculture, ecosystem restoration, clean energy, urban resilience, water security, and climate-smart economic growth. And I would again like to particularly appreciate the valuable contributions of UNDP, Pakistan, CVF V20, NDRMF, and many other development partners represented here today. Your continued support has contributed significantly to strengthening Pakistan's institutional capacity, disaster resilience, climate governance, and sustainable efforts. And I would also take this opportunity to ask you to continue this help, this support, also from the private sector, also from climate experts. We need your support, we need your input, and that is invaluable to us to strengthen our institutional capacity. Ladies and gentlemen, climate cooperation extends beyond finance. It encompasses knowledge exchange, technology transfer, scientific innovation, development, capacity development, and partnerships that empower countries to build lasting resilience. Pakistan stands prepared to work with our partners to translate these shared aspirations into practical and measurable outcomes. And from here, I think let us all resolve to leave here today with the conviction that climate resilience is not merely a national imperative, but a shared global responsibility. So together, we need to work together. That is the key word, to transform commitments into concrete actions, ambition into implementation, and vulnerability into resilience for present and future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister, for your inspiring keynote address and continued leadership on climate action and environmental sustainability. I would now request the President of the Institute of Regional Studies to deliver the concluding remarks. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Before that, we'll just invite a few questions. Ali Tawqeed Sahab had to leave because he had requested for that earlier because of a meeting he had. But we have all the other panelists. So we'll just, because of the paucity of time, we'll have 3 questions. We'll start with somebody very young. We have with us a British Pakistani from Eton College, who's Secretary of the South Asian Society there, Asim Lashari. So Asim, first question goes to you. Good. Very good. Yes, you can stand up and please. इसको ऑन कर दो माइक. ऑन करके दिया करो. Yeah. Perhaps we'll start with the minister.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that question. Like I was saying, that Pakistan is still a developing country, and we haven't reached that place where we can say that Pakistan has developed to the extent that we can look at financing these things on our own. We are, partners. We are help. I think that's if that's a question that I understood. that the trade is developing, Pakistan is developing, but we still are looking to the policies that we are looking at. For example, the NDC 3.0 that we presented this time. It was, we had said that we would enhance our output. We would give 17% locally, our own domestic input, and then the other 50, from the other 33%, we would look at for our international partners to help us to reduce our GHG emissions. Other also commitments that we have made globally, we still are looking at global finance like other developing countries, and we are working with our partners in the region to partner with them on areas of mutual interest, for example, glaciers, for example, desertification and other areas, to work together to ensure that the areas of mutual interest are presented on international platforms in a way that we are able to help the vulnerable countries, ourselves, and all the other people who still need this finance from developing countries, who have historically been the highest emitters, who have developed the industries, whereas developing countries who've been generally low emitters, like Pakistan, and are still in the developing stage, need to hold those developed countries responsible for the climate finance. And they need to take this responsibility. I don't know if this was the question that you asked.
And I think you also talked about sort of, the impact on Pakistan's foreign policy of any international development assistance that we get or we aspire for. Well, we endeavor to have an independent foreign policy, and the international development assistance that we get from international financial institutions, or sometimes bilateral or bilaterally so, our endeavor is that it should not in any way impact on our foreign policy priorities. Okay, great. Yes, please. Lady in the red.
It's a very important question, but I think one of the and you have talked all about giving conditions for this. My question has been as the Honorable Minister mentioned, talk about Ghana as well, and how they trade. Is there a program of translation or the business like and secondly, in education, I would like to cite you as an example of having the education department and consultant on that. Gender and crime is the subject that is very less talked about. And this is something I think is related with the climate efficiency and the gender. I think this is a subject of module that is more than just around tables, and the training of the trainers is very required. And I would really request if the ministry can look into it and, sort of the pilot project that, so that can be helpful. That's my suggestion. Thank you, sir.
And then we could ask.
Yes. I think both your comments are extremely effective. Definitely, I think different languages, awareness raising in all communities is very important, and any awareness raising campaigns are usually done in different languages on television or through radio, but they need to be amplified. This voice of raising climate awareness definitely needs to be amplified in different languages because Pakistan has many local languages should be used. And I agree with you on climate agenda. It's definitely a very important subject on which we always, in the ministry, we have a lot of literature, a lot of focus also, and because it's also an SDG goal. So every project that we do does keep that aspect in mind. But again, this is something that needs to be that the public needs to be made aware of more. So thank you for your suggestions.
Thank you. Amir Saab, Hamza, Amir Saab and then Hamza.
I'm sorry if this. So I'll just try to answer very quickly with an example. 2005, we saw a huge earthquake affecting Islamabad, adjoining areas, everything. For the first time in my life, I learned that in case of an earthquake, you should hide under a staircase or go under a table, and that is kind of a thing you need to. Then I'll again refer to the subsequent social audits which happened. 80% of the respondents in the perception survey said that in case of any emergency, they wouldn't call the police or any government organization. They'd probably contact their relatives. So my response to your question is, yes, you have to build these things into the curricula. The awareness would not automatically come top down. If we are one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change in the world, how much of that goes into the education of the people when they are growing up? Yes, that narrative is there. And now, so awareness definitely, I think, but I would say start the awareness from the local level. The first responders in that case, in the case of any natural disaster catastrophe, are in your house or in your neighborhood. They are not in the Tahsil headquarters or the district headquarters. I think that's the aspect we need to take forward. And that does not include a huge cost, like running media campaigns that probably, finding its way into the curricula. I would slightly also like to say that in the narrative, in my opinion, the gender aspect is not completely missing. I think it is looked upon in terms of vulnerability, that which are the most vulnerable. And I think that narrative was already there, that if you are more vulnerable, you are more vulnerable to the climate shocks. So, but I couldn't agree more with you that, but in case of the 2022 floods, many times, and that when you talk about parametric insurance and the livestock insurance and all that, a lot of people lost their lives in the areas of Sindh and Balochistan, because when the flood was imminent, a lot of them stayed with the livestock to guard the livestock. And in the end, they could not save the livestock and they could not save themselves. So I guess, those are the things which need to be, built in from the start and not as something which is, superimposed at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And thank you so much for the very important question. It's such an honor to be responding to your question, since we have been class fellows also. I think Ghuraiya Saab has touched on many of the points that I'd written down, but what I want to start off is, when we talk about climate change, right, there are two critical pillars. One is mitigation, one is adaptation. One thing we always keep in mind is adaptation is always local. Adaptation is always local. There's no question about it. Mitigation is like, putting up renewable energy and putting up all these things. But when it comes to adaptation, without local adaptation plans, without provincial adaptation plans, this is all Fugazi talk, right? We can debate on this, and we can say, this has to be done, this will be done. But the truth is, until we have those plans coming from the root, but not just the plans. It's about the awareness, it's about the plans, and it's about the ability to deliver on those plans. That is the key question. So unless and until we have those plans, and to be honest, once we have this, everything under the umbrella starts to get impacted, which includes the gender impact that comes a lot. In our societies, is also a taboo to talk about these things sometimes. So how do you get past that and you really go into the execution of it? That is where the real meat lies. So my answer to that is, in many of the countries that I work on, What is different is it's not just the awareness, it's not just the plan, it's the ability to execute those plans when a flood hits, when a disaster hits. That is going to be a critical thing. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, last question. Okay, two ladies. Okay, very quick ones. We will try to accommodate both. We'll bunch them together.
My question is regarding the finance. Start talking about bankable projects. Projects. But after that, sometimes actually putting up the numbers plan that. How we tracking this, tracking. That this is what like 4 times about trying to reach that might not be able to hold chances. No something happens. And trying to get party.
Thank you. We could have yours as last question as well. We'll bunch them together. What the blue on a panel. Can you put the mic closer to you? Important question, I guess. We would have Dr. Samuel Risk's perspective on that. On both these points. I
Yes,
think these are critical points.
So very quickly on questions asked and questions not asked. So I'd like to say one thing on gender, which I've found. I'm sometimes suspicious of, putting things together because it's fashionable. So climate and gender are sort of lumped up because it's a good bandwagon, and now everything is climatized, so we do gender. But I'll tell you the one aspect that I really regret not seeing in a lot of the disaster recovery plans, flood response plans, etc. And I think this came as a little bit of a personal, maybe other shock to me last year. Last year, we put together, alongside, I think it was the Ministry of Climate Change, Climate Change Film Week. And it was at the PNCA over here. The majority of the films that were shown were on mental health and psychosocial support after a flood, and how many families suffer suicides after they lose their home and their livelihoods, the majority of which are women. So gender, yes. Gender, livelihoods, yes. Female-headed households, yes. But mental health and psychosocial support, I believe, is still a blind spot that is not fully addressed. And I think that's one of those areas that we can actually do more on. On the private sector, the climate discussion or dialogue is so popular here in Pakistan that no week goes by where there is no 1 or 2 or 3 dialogues on climate change. These days, you just have to pick the most interesting for you. I've decided that the most interesting for me every year is the one that the Overseas Investors Chambers of Commerce and Industry puts together in Karachi. 200 of the biggest international investors here, like Unilever, Coca-Cola, Shell, Engro, et cetera, big banks, Standard Chartered. Every year they have a climate change conference that happens in January or February. And I believe that that's one of the most interesting places to have these discussions because these folks, as the saying goes, put their money where their mouth is. First of all, in their CSR portfolio, the corporate social responsibility, they spend together $50 million a year, the majority of which land as expected in education and health and climate change. Thirdly, or secondly, they figured out ways in which to actually be environmentally friendly and to adapt to climate change using a lot of innovation. So a lot of people show up to these conferences and talk about how as young investors, medium and small enterprises, they can turn household waste into bricks, for example, and they sell those. Or electric motorcycles for delivery or other purposes. You drive down anywhere in Karachi and there are like 3 or 4 companies right next to each other selling electric vehicles. That is strictly within NDC aspiration here to be able to actually have more motorized vehicles. So on the private sector discussion, I think there's a lot more to do. Now, there's a broader discussion that goes beyond climate change, which is the ability to do business or the environment of doing business in Pakistan. It's not a secret that a lot of private sector are still looking for a better environment to be able to do business. We're still talking about how do I take my investments out or export dollars. If I get into a conflict with my national partner, who's going to fix this for me? So all of these issues, I think, really need quite a big thing. If you fix the broader environment, more investors will come in. Ultimately, some of them will be able to do that as well. On the third question, which is, I mean, the most sensitive, but the ambassador already started with this. We have a terrible multilateral environment that we all exist in now. 10 years ago, if this environment existed, there would be no discussions around Paris. There would be no SDGs. There would be no architecture for peace building and prevention. All of these resolutions have come forward. Maybe not many people would have showed up to Pakistan after the 2022 flood, which then turned into a General Assembly resolution where there was this global solidarity. All of this has basically gone. I'll tell you, I mean, we're kind of taping this, but maybe you can just ignore what I say. I think a lot of us are looking forward to the next Secretary General as well, because that can bring 8 to 10 years worth of leadership in the future that can actually then withstand the kinds of pressure that the UN system is under, and to bring back some decent understanding of multilateralism where climate negotiations can again restart, where the environment of collaboration actually makes sense, making it easier for agencies and funds and programs in the UN system to be able to do the work, whereas the member state responsibility of figuring out policy and collaboration actually moves ahead. To the last point on governance, a lot of the questions, because this comes back to the discussion, a lot of the asks that we get now as UNDP and maybe other agencies as well, whether it's federally or provincially, on specific support to making governance for climate change work. So through our governance program, curiously enough, not the climate change program, Sindh Planning and Development Board requested support for a climate planning and development unit that actually does climate finance. Through the human rights program, because climate security and, you know, a bunch of activists, young people in Gawadir are really quite enthusiastic about environment, climate change cell is being implemented in the government of Balochistan. These asks are governance asks. They're not money asks. They're not projects, etc. But I think that's an important signal that already this idea that the most lessons learned these days from a mega disaster are mostly governance lessons not more financial asks, I think this is really quite significant to note. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Riz. Minister, would you like to respond to that point regarding why when so many MOUs are signed worth billions of dollars, nothing happens?
Yes, I would just like to add that, like we've been saying, climate finance is now a very important aspect of this. And actually, the two questions are related because, as you rightly pointed out, the historical emitters who have built the industries, who are now developed, and who have contributed mostly to the greenhouse gas emissions that is there on our planet right now, which is affecting our planet, are the ones who are ironically getting most of also the money that goes into climate. So they are the ones who are getting it also, and the developing countries are still not getting it, and they are still, despite still not being very high emitters, because we're not developing at that rate. So we don't have that kind of, industry. We still are getting less money, and even the money that we get is dragged out so much, takes so much time to actually reach us, and then the projects are done. We do have now budget tagging. So every project that is presented as a government project is climate tagged. It has a green component to it. So we are trying to make sure that every project ensures that it is climate tagged. Yet this injustice is there. So the just distribution of whatever climate funds are promised or are distributed is something that all the global south is getting together now, as Mr. Hamza also pointed out, that these are things that now we have started to raise our voice on. And this is ideally, I think you've made a very good point. They should be taxed on that also, but that perhaps, I don't know when we will reach that point, but definitely their voice is being raised, and everybody, all the institutions also, the UN also is now raising their voice on that.
Thank you. So I think in the coming days and years, we'll see that the Global South's voice becoming more consequential, inshallah. Well, I think we had a brilliant session. The minister's presence here underlines the importance that the Ministry for Climate Change pays to this debate, because it is from such informed debates that you can come up with ideas for an informed policy. We're also very appreciative of Dr. Sam Rizk being here. He's always been a very productive partner, and that clearly demonstrates UNDP's commitment to Pakistan's not just development, but climate resilience as well. Also, Dr. Ali Tawqir Sheikh, who had to leave earlier, Amir Saab, for some very valuable comments, all the panelists, and as always, their friend Hamza, who comes up with very incisive and very innovative ideas. This is the defining theme of our times. I always say that for many countries in the world, climate change challenges can be important as much as some other challenges. For Pakistan, it's an existential challenge. So for this region, South Asia, which houses 1/4 of humanity, climate change, how we deal with the climate change challenges, when our glaciers are melting, when we are turning into a water-scarce region of the world, when our cities are some of the most polluted. In fact, they're perhaps now the most polluted in the world. If you see the list of top 10, almost 80% of the cities in the top 10 list are in South Asia. We're also facing challenges of sort of increasing temperatures. This summer underlines that. And then, of course, those cataclysmic events which are becoming norms, like the floods Pakistan suffered a couple of years ago when 60% of the country was inundated. These challenges are now touching the life of each and every citizen in the country and in the region. And I think we need a national emergency in terms of dealing with these issues. But Pakistan cannot do it alone, because these are challenges which are global in nature. No one country can do much on its own, because what happens in Pakistan affects what happens in other parts of the South Asia, and vice versa as well. Climate-related challenges do not recognize any borders, and that is why it has to be a coordinated action. The world needs to get together, perhaps in a better organized way than it has done so far. Since 1992, I mentioned the Earth Summit, a lot of ground has been covered. But I tell you, it is far below what should have been done. It is gravely insufficient. And if humanity does not focus better on this, this could become existential challenge, not just for Pakistan or countries like Pakistan that are more vulnerable countries, but for the entire planet. There should be no doubt on that. And that is why we at IRS, we have 2 programs on climate related challenges. We will continue to be part of this debate and discussion. So with these words, I'd like to thank once again for the, I would like to convey my thanks, especially to the Minister, Dr. Rizk, and all other panelists, and not just them, to all of you, and your presence here, this full house here very clearly underlines how much the scholars in Pakistan, the intellectuals in Pakistan, the students in Pakistan, the youth of Pakistan is committed to discuss, and not just discuss, but to ensure that our policymakers pay due attention to these challenges. So I'd like to thank you all for being here today and being part of this very important discussion. I'd like to now invite you all to join me in a big hand of applause for our speakers today.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I now request our distinguished speakers, guests, and interns of the climate program to please join for a group photo. This brings us to the conclusion of today's high-level policy dialogue. We now invite you to join us for a networking tea in the lobby. Thank you once again for your participation.